Crystal chandeliers hang high, scattering shimmering light across champagne glasses and glittering gowns. The hall is dressed in white roses and silver candles. The band carries a lilting waltz through the air. It looks complete. Yet in a quiet corner, one heartbeat keeps its own time. An unspoken word rests at the edge of the tongue, waiting to cross the room. When it does, the music will change and this shining night will not be the same. Stay with me. Before the last note, you will know why. Lena Hart sat alone at a round table in the corner, trying to maintain a calm exterior, even as her palms grew damp with sweat. Her navy blue dress hugged her slim figure, while the high heels she wore made her steps feel somewhat awkward across the red-carpeted floor. She hardly knew anyone here besides her best friend, the bride, who was now busy holding the groom's hand and smiling radiantly under the photographer's flashing lights. "Alone, are you?" A woman's voice from the next table broke in, tinged with a half-smile. Lena gave a small nod, replying curtly. Yet she could still feel the woman's scrutinizing gaze. Hardly the first time. Lavish weddings were always full of whispers. She came alone. No boyfriend. Looks a little out of place, doesn't she? Lena sighed softly and raised her glass to her lips, masking her discomfort behind a sip of wine. She usually didn't care about idle stares, but tonight, under the glittering eyes of the high society crowd, her solitude seemed amplified to an almost unbearable degree. "If you are liking my story, rate this story out of 10. She glanced at her watch. Only 8 o'clock. Far too early to leave without seeming rude. Just as Lena was about to rise and find a quiet spot to breathe, a tall figure appeared beside her table. He sat down with a decisive motion, as if this seat had always belonged to him. A perfectly tailored black suit, a silver silk tie catching the light, and sharp features paired with a cold, piercing gaze instantly drew the attention of those nearby. Lena blanked, caught off guard. When the man leaned closer, his deep voice brushing her ear. "Pretend you're with me," Lena froze. Her heart skipped a beat, half stunned, half intrigued. "Excuse me," she whispered back, leaning slightly away to keep some distance. Without looking at her, his eyes stayed fixed on a group of guests a few tables away. "They're gossiping. If you don't mind, let's pretend we came together." Lena let out a quiet laugh, both annoyed and amused by the absurdity. "And you think I'll just play the girlfriend of a complete stranger?" At last he turned toward her, steel gray eyes, cold yet glinting beneath their icy surface. He leaned down slightly, close enough for Lena to catch the refined scent of sandalwood rising from his collar. "Just pretend. Trust me, you'll avoid those unpleasant stares, and I'll dodge a meaningless setup. We both win." Lena bit her lip, hesitating for a second. Honestly, he wasn't wrong. Already, the looks aimed her way had shifted from judgmental to curious. "Oh, so the girl sitting alone actually has a date. Fine." Her lips curved in a half-teasing, half-defiant smile. "But how far are you planning to take this act?" His brow arched, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly. "Leave that to me." Then he draped his arm casually over the back of her chair. A gesture so naturally intimate, it made nearby guests cover their mouths and giggle. Lena straightened instinctively, a silent alarm sounding in her head. Danger. This man is far too skilled at playing the part. "What's your name?" she asked softly, suspicion edging her tone. "Cashin Vale." His answer was brief, needing no elaboration. Lena stiffened. That name was hardly unfamiliar. The youngest CEO in finance. Infamous for his cold ruthlessness in the business world. Good grief, am I really pretending to be Cashin Vale's girlfriend? She was about to react when he smoothly poured more wine into her glass. Every inch the courteous gentleman. "Relax, Lena Hart." He spoke her full name and her heart faltered. "You know me," Cashin shrugged. "I have a good memory for remarkable faces." His gaze locked with hers so sharp Lena had to look away, her pulse racing. Whether from discomfort or something else, she wasn't sure. The rest of the evening turned into a finely tuned performance. When a guest approached their table, Cashin introduced Lena as his special someone, his voice steady, though his eyes carried a hint of amusement. Lena, though awkward, played along, smiling sweetly, nodding as though it were true. "You two make such a lovely couple," one lady praised, her glance full of implication. Lena nearly laughed. "Me? A financial journalist fueled by instant coffee and deadlines matched with this arrogant CEO." Yet, strangely, under the weight of those watching eyes, the role didn't feel unbearable. Whenever she faltered, Cashin would lean in with a quiet joke or skillfully steer the conversation in a different direction. "You're quite the actor," Lena murmured as they stepped away to fetch dessert. Cashin glanced at her, the faint curve of his lips returning. "Who said I was acting?" The short reply sent warmth rushing to her cheeks, her heart skipping a beat once again. In that moment, amid the glittering lights and music of the grand hall, they could have been mistaken for true lovers, though they had only just met an hour ago. The strange chemistry between two strangers charged the air around them, half playful, half electric. Lena took another sip of wine, suppressing the smile, tugging at her lips. She told herself, this is just a performance. Tomorrow everything will return to normal. But deep down she knew the instant that man whispered, "Pretend you're with me," a story neither of them could foresee had already begun. Lena thought the little play at the wedding would end the moment fireworks lit up the sky. By morning, she'd be back to her usual orbit: laptop, deadlines, thick stacks of financial reports. But life never grants clean exits. 3 days later, just as Lena stepped out of the newsroom, a sleek black Bentley slid to the curb. The window lowered to reveal a familiar glacial face. Cashin Vale. She stopped, pulse hitching. "Don't tell me you're here to buy a newspaper." He checked his watch, voice low and even. "If you're free, I need 5 minutes." "Sounds like a political interview," Lena said, but she still opened the door and slipped inside. The plush interior made her scuffed heels feel wildly out of place. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Do you remember what I said at the wedding?" Lena's smile turned sly. "Hard to forget, especially after all that counterfeit grinning." "I nearly choked performing for those women." The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. "Here's the situation. Press and investors are pushing. They find it odd that I don't have a girlfriend or a family yet. My valuation shouldn't hinge on my private life, but the chatter is getting tiresome." Lena folded her arms. "What are your thoughts about Lena and what will happen to her next?" "So you want me to keep up the act?" "Precisely." Cashin held her eyes without flinching. "I need someone sharp, resilient enough not to become a joke in front of cameras." He paused, a heartbeat. "I thought you played the part exceptionally well." Lena laughed outright. "That's a peculiar compliment. Instead of you're gorgeous, it's you're a gifted performer." "Both are accurate," he said evenly, and the words stilled her at once. The air inside the car drew tight. Lena knew she should decline. She didn't have time to be anyone's pretend partner. But a thought landed. If she agreed, she'd gain entry to the highest circles, straight into the orbit of names tied to the financial scandal her newsroom was chasing. This might be the very door she needed. Propping her chin on her hand, she faked consideration. "And how exactly do you expect to compensate me for the part?" "Respect, secrecy, and a measure of convenience," Cashin replied without pause. Lena Hart doesn't sell for that little. She lent her eyes playful. "I want full authority to walk away anytime I decide you're unbearably dull." A quiet laugh left him. "Rare and warm, like frost cracking under sun, agreed. And I reserve the right to end it if you become a PR catastrophe. The only catastrophe here is your suit being too flawless, making other women glare like I'm clinging." Then I'll look at you with enough devotion to convince them otherwise." His tone stayed flat, but mischief flickered in his eyes. Lena swallowed. This man truly knew how to unsettle a woman. She extended her hand. Temporary arrangement, his grip closed firm and heated around hers. "Just pretend, heart." "Yes, pretend," she echoed. Though deep down it felt like stepping into something perilous. The very next day, their staged relationship met its first trial. Cashin brought Lena to a charity gala. "You sure about this?" "These heels are brand new." "I might heat the red carpet," Lena muttered as the door swung open. "If you fall, I'll carry you in." Cashin's voice was matter-of-fact. "You realize lines like that make it very difficult to concentrate." "Right. Exactly. That's the idea." He offered his hand like a gentleman out of another era. Inside the venue, every gaze snapped to them at once. Whispers swelled. "Cashin Vale has a girlfriend." "Who is she?" Lena drew a steady breath, smiling with poise. "Perform, heart. Pretend you're crafting an undercover piece." Cashin leaned close to her ear, warmth threading his voice. "Your smile is much better than at the wedding. It seems less forced. You should try it too." Instead of wearing that frozen mask, Lena murmured back. He tipped his mouth slightly, letting the fincus curve appear. Like this, Lena caught it, her pulse tripping. Damn it. The half-smile was more dangerous than a falsified earnings report. The gala progressed, and to Lena's surprise, they executed their roles flawlessly. Cashin kept her hand as he introduced her to partners, and she deftly fielded reporters, as though she truly were his hidden girlfriend. When the night finally closed, they sank into the car, both breathing out in relief. "I'll concede, Lena," he said. "You really are a natural bee-born actor." Cashin smoothed his tie, eyes fixed on the glass. "To outsiders, all I need is to stay cold. But with you, I don't have to act as much." Lena had no words. Silence gathered between them, heavy as velvet curtains in an empty theater, while the city smeared by and the engine kept a low, steady hum. Outside, she turned away, hiding the smile, tugging at her lips. Inside, she whispered to herself, "Careful, heart. This little game of pretend might not stay pretend for long." In the days that followed, Lena Hart's name suddenly began circulating regularly on the lips of high society. Not because she was a sharp financial journalist, but because she was the unexpected girlfriend of Cashin Vale. Lena often asked herself, "How did I end up in this charade?" But each time she looked in the mirror and saw the evening gown borrowed from her sister's closet, along with the ornate invitation card in her purse, she reminded herself, "This is an opportunity. Act the part, but observe. Maybe I'll uncover a lead for that financial scandal." On Friday night, Cashin took her to a fundraising gala at the Art Museum. The grand hall glowed under dazzling lights. Abstract paintings hung along the walls, and guests in expensive attire moved like chess pieces across the floor. "Don't be nervous," Cashin murmured as he guided Lena inside, his steady hand resting on her waist. "I'm not nervous," she replied, though her heel nearly caught on the edge of the carpet, making her stumble. Cashin frowned slightly before catching her arm. "Careful. I don't want my fake girlfriend turning into a joke in the first 5 minutes." Lena shot him a glare and whispered back, "Instead of mocking me, you could just say, 'I look beautiful.'" "You know," he tilted his head, his icy eyes flickering with a spark. "You look beautiful, but your shoes are clearly the traitor here." Lena bit her lip to hide a smile, then straightened up and slipped back into her role. Throughout the evening, they had to publicly display affection under the watchful eyes of the guests. Cashin kept his composed CEO expression, but each time she faltered, he covered for her effortlessly, like the moment she accidentally dropped a silver spoon into her glass of red wine, producing a loud clanging sound. Curious eyes turned to water, and Lena flushed crimson. Without missing a beat, Cashin lifted his own glass, tapped it lightly with a clear clink, and smiled. "Allow me to propose a toast to tonight's success." The crowd immediately cheered, laughter dissolving the awkwardness. Lena looked at him, equal parts grateful and astonished. So the cold-blooded CEO does know how to save the moment. The most striking moment came when they posed for photos in front of a wall of white orchids. The photographer directed, "Mr. Vale, hold your girlfriend a little closer." Lena nearly protested, but Cashin had already pulled her firmly against him, whispering near her ear, "Just pretend we're playing happy newlyweds." Her heart skipped wildly. She forced a smile, but the flashing cameras captured the scene from every angle. As soon as they stepped down, Lena glared at him. "You took advantage of that way too much." Cashin remained calm. "You did well. Your smile looked more natural than I expected." "So you're saying I usually smile falsely?" He didn't answer, just gave the faintest curve of his lips. That silence left Lena both annoyed and strangely worn. Even while the performance went smoothly, Lena didn't forget her true goal. Whenever Cashin was occupied with business partners, she quietly drifted near other tables, eavesdropping on scattered conversations. One night, standing by the biff, she overheard two middle-aged businessmen whispering about funds flowing through a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. The keyword instantly triggered her journalist's instincts. Lena quickly memorized the company name and the vague numbers they mentioned. When she returned to the table, Cashin frowned. "Where did you disappear to? Getting more dessert?" Lena held up a plate with a tiny mousse, her smile all innocence. He studied her for a moment, as though trying to read something behind her bright brown eyes. Finally, he shook his head lightly. "Don't make me search for you in the crowd. A real girlfriend doesn't vanish halfway through. A fake one does." Lena a grin, though inside she was on high alert. "He's sharper than I thought. I need to be careful." Toward the end of the night, as they passed through the gallery, Cashin stopped before a deep blue landscape painting. His voice dropped unexpectedly. "My mother used to love the shade of blue. She said it reminded her of the sea back home." Lena blinked in surprise. This was the first time he'd shared anything personal beyond the curt lines of a CEO. She glanced sideways and noticed his gaze wasn't cold now, but tinged with memory. "I didn't think you'd ever talk about family," she said softly. "I didn't think I'd tell anyone at this event," he replied, his voice low and warm. In that moment, Lena realized that beneath his icy exterior, Cashin was also a man carrying hidden corners and longings. That sudden glimpse of warmth made her heart stir in an unusual way. On the ride home, silence filled the car. Lena leaned back, her eyes drifting to the invitation card, still tucked in her purse. These events were opening doors to the world she needed to access. "Funds and Cayman," she repeated to herself. "I need to trace this lead. But what if Cashin's involved?" She turned to glance at him. He was looking out the window, calm and unreadable. Unbidden, she recalled his steady hand saving her from falling. The look in his eyes when he mentioned his mother. Part of her wanted to believe he was innocent, but her profession and instincts whispered, "No one in the financial world is completely clean." "What is it?" Cashin suddenly turned, catching her stare. Lena quickly smiled, masking her thoughts. "Nothing. Just wondering what I should wear tomorrow to match this girlfriend role." He nodded, the faintest curve touching his lips. "Wear whatever makes you comfortable. The rest I'll handle." Lena smiled back, though her heart churned. This was still a play, but if one day it stopped being pretend, what then? Lena thought this pretend relationship would only extend to lavish parties where they held hands just to fend off curious stares. But on Saturday night, Cashin proved she had guessed completely wrong. The familiar Bentley stopped in front of her apartment, the driver stepping out to open the door. Cashin appeared, dressed in a suit simpler than usual, yet still radiating that unmistakable aura. And where are you dragging me this time? Another tuxedo-filled gala? Lena asked as she slid into the car. Half serious, half joking. No, he replied shortly. Tonight is different. Less wine, more music. 15 minutes later, they pulled up at an old theater downtown with the glowing marquee announcing a special symphony concert. Beethoven and Rachmaninoff. Lena blinked in surprise. You're taking me to classical music. Cashin shrugged, his voice steady. My pretend girlfriend needs a touch of reality too. Otherwise, the audience will see through the script. She chuckled softly and followed him inside. The theater glowed in golden hues. Its high ceiling painted with murals, rows of red velvet seats stretching out beneath the chandeliers. As the lights dimmed, the orchestra began its first notes. Lena sat beside Cashin, shoulders brushing into Lena's space, and felt a flicker of awkwardness. The music swelled, at times soft as a whisper, at times surging like a storm. In the dim light, she stole a glance. Cashin sat upright, his usual stern face softened, his gaze distant, as if fixed on some place beyond the present. Between movements, he spoke, his baritone folding into the cello's afterglow. When I was a kid, my mother would play pieces like this at night. She'd say, Cashin, you can become anything you want, but never forget to listen. Lena angled her head. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother. She died when I was 10, he went on, eyes fixed on the stage. My father was another story. For him, silence outweighed melody. He believed a veiled son must be hard, immaculate, no errors permitted. Lena stilled, feeling a gravity in his voice he'd never exposed before. Immaculate. Sounds suffocating. She breathed. He turned to her, gray eyes catching the low light. It was, but without precision, I wouldn't be here now. My father left me no alternative. Lena swallowed, fighting the urge to reach for him. Instead, she offered a soft smile. Maybe he forgot that flaws are often what makes someone unforgettable. A small pause settled. Then Cashin's mouth lifted, barely there. After the concert, perhaps they wandered into a tiny cafe off the square. Unlike the polished rooms he usually occupied, this one was modest. Wooden tables, honeyed lamps, the thick aroma of fresh roast. Never thought I'd see Cashin Vale in a cafe like a regular man, Lena teased. Keep it quiet, he said, raising a cappuccino. I'd ruined my frosty cow persona. She laughed, surprised he could even make a joke. They chatted a while about music, about fare-off business flights. Slowly, Lena saw that beneath the chill in spreadsheets, Cashin had a heart that could be stirred. For a brief second, she nearly forgot her mission. Nearly. When Cashin stepped out to take a call, Lena slipped out her phone and skimmed through the shots she'd taken at the hall. Donation envelopes and sponsor plards. A few names mirrored the list tied to those murky Cayman funds she'd been tracing. She saved them. Pulse quickening. This is movement. The deeper I waded into Cashin's world, the nearer I get to the truth. He came back and she tucked her phone away, finding interest in her coffee. Something wrong? He asked, a flicker of doubt in his gaze. No, just, she shrugged lightly. Maybe I should try shorter heels tomorrow so you'll stop teasing me. Cashin's lips shaped that familiar half-smile. Then I'll just hold your hand tighter so your shoes don't get the chance to betray you again. The line caught her off guard. She burst into laughter, hiding the sudden rush of heat. That night in her small apartment, Lena sat before her laptop and opened her notes. Names and figures were starting to form a blurred outline. Her fingers brushed her mouth, still tingling with the echo of his story about his mother. Her heart and her mind were preparing for war. On one side, a powerful man with unexpected scenes of warmth. On the other, her duty as a reporter to chase the truth. Even if it cracked her own heart, Lena murmured, just pretend. Heart, don't forget. But deep down, she knew the app was already becoming far more real than she'd planned. Lena never imagined a collision of two worlds could feel this stark. By day, she was a financial journalist buried in data streams and dry spreadsheets. By night, she was the pretend girlfriend of a cold CEO, appearing at galas, where champagne overflowed and laughter burst like fireworks. Late one night, hunched over her laptop and a sea of spreadsheets, Lena went still. Buried in the tangle was a name that flashed like a warning: Cell C Holdings. Funds pouring in from anonymous offshore accounts, then disappearing without a trace. Money laundering. Her pen bit into her fingers as her pulse quickened. This was her first truly explosive lead, except SLC Holdings sat under the Veil Group. She leaned back, exhaling hard. God, I'm pretending to be the CEO's girlfriend. Her rational side pressed. This is your chance to blow the scandal wide open. Her heart pushed back. What if he isn't involved? What if he's another cog getting ground up by the machine? The more she turned it over, the more split she felt. Around the same time, Cashin invited her to his best friend's birthday, more intimate, fewer tuxedos, more cocktails. Lena wasn't thrilled, but she didn't refuse. Consider it fieldwork, she told herself. Maybe someone would slip. The scene couldn't have been further from a black tie banquet. Neon stuttering over brick, jazz braided with pop, bodies loose and laughing on the floor. Perched at the bar, Lena twirled her martini and smirked to herself. If I run a piece tomorrow titled Cold-Blooded CEO Knows How to Dance, Wall Street would faint. What's making you smile? Cashin's voice came behind her. He cradled. A whiskey, tie loosened, jacket open so, unlike his usual precision. Just testing headlines, Lena said, shrugging. Something like, Veil drunk, dancing on tables, stock drops 3%. He lifted a brow, sipping. If that ever happened, my stock would drop at least 10. Lena barked a laugh, startled by the dry wit. The night stretched on. When most guests had drifted out, Cashin walked her to the door. The air was cool. The faint tang of alcohol lingered between them. Little drunk? Lena tilted her head, eyeing him. I can handle it, he said, though his pace had slowed. They paused on the stone steps outside. Under the gold wash of the street lamps, their shadows stretched long across the pavement. Lena opened her mouth to break the silence, but Cashin turned to her. His usual steel gray eyes glowed with an unusual warmth. He stepped closer, closing the distance to barely an arm's length. Lena, he said softly. What? She stammered instinctively, taking half a step back, only to hit the wall behind her. You make me forget this is just pretend. Before she could react, he leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was sudden, brief, but intense. The taste of whiskey mingled with his familiar scent of sandalwood. Lena froze for a few seconds, then her heart pounded so wildly she couldn't push him away. When Cashin finally pulled back, he stayed close enough for his warm breath to brush her skin. Are you insane? Lena whispered, her cheeks blazing. Maybe? His voice was low, a faint elusive smile on his lips. Lena touched her mouth, torn between laughing and screaming. Part of her shouted, God, the ice-cold CEO just kissed me. Another part reminded her, don't forget the money laundering. Don't forget your mission. We're just pretending, Lena said, her voice uneven. Yes, Cashin nodded. But his gaze was anything but pretend. But some moments I don't want to act anymore. Lena was speechless, her heartbeat hammering. On the ride home, the only sound was the low hum of the engine. Cashin rested with his eyes closed while Lena stared out the window, her thoughts tangled. She had just uncovered a scandalous lead, yet also received the kiss that made her heart race for real. When the car stopped in front of her building, Cashin opened his eyes, his voice husky. Good night, heart. Lena stepped out, stood for a long moment, watching the car disappear into the night. She whispered, Good night, Veil, and here's hoping. I don't dream of trouble. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, the laptop on her desk still glowed with the report on SLC Holdings untouched. Instead of reading, Lena only reached up to touch her lips, half smiling, half sighing. In the darkness, she knew it clearly. The first crack had appeared. Monday morning, Lena sat in her small office at the newsroom, staring at rows of cold numbers on her laptop screen. Beside her, a colleague whispered with theatrical urgency. "Lena, fresh intel. A batch of documents shows the final signatory for SLC Holdings. Was it Cash and Vale?" Her heart stopped. "Are you sure?" "I'm 70% sure, but we don't have originals yet. Just leaked scans. It'll take time to verify." Lena nodded, finding calm, though inside she felt strangled. Cashin, the man who kissed her breathless just days ago. The man who told her about his mother, about his childhood. He signed those papers. She tried to shake it off. A journalist had to stay sharp, but her heart kept whispering, "What if he's innocent? What if this is a trap?" Lena shut her eyes, repeating to herself, "Heart, don't go soft. Justice is justice." Yet the words tasted far more bitter than she expected. That afternoon, Cashin called unexpectedly. "Are you free? I want you to come with me to headquarters. I have something to share." His voice was low, decisive. Lena hesitated for a beat, then agreed. It was also a chance to observe the moment. She stepped into the Vale Group's towering glass building. She felt as if she had crossed into another world. A vast atrium, ceilings reflecting light, employees moving briskly like worker bees. "This is where he runs his empire," she thought, "and I am pretending to be the tycoon's girlfriend." The elevator carried them to the 50th floor. Cashin's office was as wide as a modern museum. Floor-to-ceiling glass with a panoramic city view, a walnut desk, and bookshelves lined with leather spines. "Wow," Lena muttered. "At a kitchen and I could move in." Cashin glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "You'd find working here anything but comfortable, but I think you'll like this." He led her to a massive world map on the wall, dotted with red pins across continents. "This is my expansion plan," Cashin explained, his voice deep and steady. "Next year, I want to invest in clean energy in Asia, biotech in Europe, and online education in South America. If we get it right, the company won't just make money, it'll leave something of real value for the next generation." Lena stared at him, stunned. Not just a money-hungry CEO, as the press painted him. He was talking about changing the world. "Sounds like a Nobel speech," she teased lightly, though her chest warmed. Cashin chuckled softly, his eyes gentler. "Do you always have to hide behind sarcasm?" "It's my defense mechanism," Lena admitted quickly, turning a wagon mazer on ease. Guilt hit her like a wave. He trusted her. He was sharing things he probably never told the press. And she had a USB stick in her bag, containing data on money laundering. Lena felt like she was playing two roles on the same stage. Cashin's girlfriend on one side, and a journalist poised to expose him on the other. That evening after work, Cashin took her to dinner at a small riverside restaurant. No gala, no camera flashes, just soft candlelight and the sound of water lapping against the shore. Lena sat across from him, holding the menu, but unable to read a word. In her mind, the word signatory blinked like a warning light. "You all right?" Cashin tilted his head. "You've been distracted all afternoon. I'm fine." Lena forced a smile. "Just hungry." "If you're hungry, you should eat. I could order the entire menu if necessary." His tone was so serious that Lena burst out laughing. "Are you trying to turn me into living proof for shareholders that your empire is branching into gastronomy?" "Possibly, if you agree to eat enough." The air grew lighter. But when Lena met his eyes, her chest tightened. He was trusting her, opening up to her. And all she wanted to ask was, "Did you sign those papers?" But she couldn't. Not yet. After dinner, Cashin suggested a walk by the river. Streetlights shimmered on the water, the breeze cool against their faces. "Do you ever feel," Cashin said quietly, "like you have to keep pushing just to please everyone?" Lena startled. "Are you talking about yourself or me?" "Both." He stopped, locking eyes with her. "I've never met anyone as independent and sharp-edged as you who still makes people want to protect her." Lena flushed quickly, deflecting. "You should drink less wine. It makes you say things that could be misunderstood." "It's not the wine," he answered softly, firmly. Her heart raced, her thoughts tangled. If he truly signed, she would have to expose him. But if he was innocent, she'd be the only traitor. Biting her lip, she masked her turmoil with a joke. "Tell me, if I trip again in these heels, can you guarantee you'll catch me?" Cashin smirked, leaning close to her ear. "No matter how many times you fall, I'll catch you as long as you let me." His words made Lena want to laugh and cry simultaneously. That night, back at her apartment, she opened her laptop. The scanned document glowed on the screen. Cashin's signature, bold and precise. It could be forged or it could be real. Lena buried her face in her hands. Justice or love heart, you have to choose. But God, she wasn't ready. Outside, the city lights blazed. Inside her small apartment, Lena felt like a tightrope walker. Truth on one side, her heart on the other, and the rope was trembling more violently with every step. Still following the story. If this found you outside Soul Stories, welcome home. Comment below. What story do you want to hear next? If Lena had to name this stage of her life, she would probably call it night and day. By day, she was a financial journalist, tearing few numbers and dissecting reports. By night, she became Cashin's pretend girlfriend, swept into evenings of romance, unexpected hand-holding, and sometimes glances strong enough to keep her awake until morning. "Hold still, heart." Cashin tilted his head, adjusting the strap of her necklace on her shoulder. "You act like my stylist," Lena muttered, cheeks heating. "Not a stylist," he said smoothly. "Just a man who appreciates beauty." Lena looked up almost laughing. This CEO truly had a way of making her both annoyed and unsettled at once. That evening they attended a small gathering that was not too crowded. Cashin and Lena worked like a perfectly cinched pair. He reminded her not to leave her wine glass empty too long while she pulled him into lighter conversations to dodge boring business chatter. Amid curious stares, Cashin leaned down and whispered, "You're doing better than I expected." "Really? Then I'll raise my fee." Lena shot back, eyes glimmering. He chuckled softly, a rare sound like ice cracking in winter. Lena felt dizzy. Damn it, why does his laugh make my pulse spike? A few days later, Cashin unexpectedly drove her to the family estate, a suburban miniature palace. Weathered white walls, a rose garden in riotous bloom, a pond mirroring the sky. "Why bring me here? Testing if I'm afraid of haunted mansions?" Lena teased, only half joking. "To meet the person I trust most," he said. She froze. The person he trusted. Moments later, a young woman with soft brown hair and bright, curious eyes appeared. Cashin's voice gentled. "This is Eliza, my sister." Eliza's smile was warm. "So you're Lena. I finally meet my brother's secret girlfriend." Heat rushed to Lena's face fake, hovered on her tongue when Cashin's palm settled lightly at her back, a quiet warning. "That's right," he replied, softer than usual. "Lena is someone special." Her pulse stumbled. Performance for his sister or something else? Dinner turned surprisingly easy. Eliza's childhood stories made Lena laugh. Cashin joined in, ribbing his sister and at times her. When Eliza slipped off for dessert, Lena exhaled. "You're making me feel like an actual girlfriend." "Maybe because that's what I want," Cashin said, gaze darkening. Her breath caught. She lifted her glass to hide the heat in her cheeks. Back home, Lena tossed in bed. Every time she closed her eyes, he reappeared, crisp suit, that faint, disarming smile. She sat up, opened her laptop, tried to drown herself in work. Instead, his words looped. Maybe because that's what I want. She raked a hand through her hair. God, Hart, what are you doing? By morning, digging through a data archive she could access as a reporter, she found the last thing she expected. A transfer record stamped SLC Holdings. Huge sums routed from murky offshore sources into European subsidiaries. And at the bottom a signature she knew too well. Cash and Vale. Lena went rigid. Fingers shaking, she zoomed in. The strokes matched, bold, decisive. No way, she whispered, heart twisting. If it was real, the man who just introduced her to his sister was tied to laundering. But what if it was forged? What if someone had weaponized his name? Her thoughts spun. What am I supposed to do? That afternoon, Cashin called. I'm free, walk? She almost said no, but his tone was lighter than she'd ever heard, open, almost hopeful. Yes, she said. They wandered along the river, gold light spilling over the water. Cashin stopped and handed her a small box. A gift? Lena arched a brow. Does it come with a tracker? He laughed. Just a pen. I figured a journalist would appreciate it. Inside, a fine fountain pen, her name engraved along the barrel. Lena closed her fingers around it, warmth and ache colliding. He trusted her while she hid the biggest thing from him. She joked to cover the choke in her throat. You know, this feels like pressure. Like you're signing me to a long-term girlfriend contract. Cashin tipped his head, voice low. And what if that's exactly what I want? Silence settled. Inside her, the battle blazed again. Justice or love? That night, sleep wouldn't come. The pen lay on her desk, catching the lamp's glow. Her laptop still showed the transfer report. On one side, a small gift humming with warmth. On the other, evidence that could ruin Cashin, she whispered. Half a laugh, half a choke. Congrats, Hart. You've made yourself the heroine of your own tragedy. In the still room, only the clock ticked while her heart ran wild. Lena's sleepless stretch had just begun. For 7 days straight, Lena felt like a tightrope walker, one gust from falling. Each morning at the newsroom, her editor called her in behind a desk buried in files. Glasses sliding down his nose, his tone could make any reporter sweat. Lena, you already have the scan signature. What are you waiting on? It hasn't been fully validated yet. Sir Lena swallowed, unable to meet his eyes. Her editor slammed a hand on the desk. Listen, this can't wait. Other outlets are sniffing around. If you don't file within 2 days, I'll hand it to Grant. He could turn Cashin Vale into Wall Street's cold-blooded Vulf in 500 words. Is that what you want? Lena froze. Grant was infamous, sharp, ruthless. If he wrote it, Cashin would be shredded to pieces with no mercy. Her heart screamed, no one else can write about him like that. But her reason whispered, this is journalism. Justice doesn't wait. Lena forced herself to nod. All right, I'll write it, but I need some time to polish it. Her editor's eyes cut through her like X-rays. 1 week, no more, or you lose the story. And maybe your position. Lena walked out, her legs heavy. She wanted to scream, but all she could do was sigh until her lungs ached. That night in her apartment, the laptop screen glowed, a blank page blinking at her. An hour passed and not a single word was typed. She pressed a hand against her chest. Hart, what are you doing? Her professional conscience told her to write, but her heart refused. Cashin didn't seem like the greedy, ruthless man tied to money laundering. And yet that signature, Lena buried her hands in her hair, letting out a bitter laugh. Justice and love. Congratulations. I've chosen 2 eternal enemies. She opened her closet, her eyes falling on the pen box Cashin had given her. The small gift tightened her chest. If you were innocent, One false article could destroy him. If he was guilty, this love would be her greatest shame. The next day, whispers swirled around the newsroom. Word his heart is sitting on a bombshell about Blackwood. Will she actually publish? Better not let Grant grab it. If he writes it, Blackwood's finished. Lena pressed her lips together. A decision sparked inside her. She couldn't let Grant take it. If anyone was going to write, it had to be her. At least then she could buy time. Marching into her editor's office, her voice was steady. I'll write it. The article will come from me. Her editor's face broke in dissatisfaction. Good. 1 week, no delays. Lena left, her heart pounding. She had just signed her own sentence, but at least this gave her time and a chance to face Cashin. That evening, Lena sat on her bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Cashin Vale's name. She typed, "We need to talk about your company," then deleted it. Typed again, "I have something important to tell you." Deleted. God, I sound like a 17-year-old afraid to confess a crush, not a journalist about to drop an explosive investigation, she muttered with a self-deprecating laugh. Finally, she took a deep breath and wrote simply, "We need to meet privately." Less than a minute later, Cashin replied, "Tomorrow night." My office. Lena gripped her phone, her chest both sinking and racing. Tomorrow everything would explode. That night's sleep never came. She tossed, turned, rolled left, rolled right. Her mind was a storm. One moment she saw Cashin by the window, his gentle eyes gazing out as he spoke of his mother. Next, the transfer report with his decisive signature. She buried her face in the pillow and groaned. Why hasn't anyone invented sleeping pills specifically for journalists who fall in love with their investigation subjects? The room was silent, save for the ticking clock. Lena knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow she would have to make a choice, and that choice might shatter both her heart and her career. That morning, the brilliant sunlight outside her window meant nothing to her. Lena had just taken a bitter sip of coffee when her phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "Come down, I'm waiting." She stared at the words, her stomach dropping. Before she could react, a knock sounded at the door. She didn't need to guess who it was. Cashin Vale. The door opened. He stood there tall and imposing, filling the frame. His face was carved in ice, his gray eyes stripped of the warmth they'd held on past nights. Lena had never seen him like this, like a storm restrained only by sheer force of will. "Cashin," she stammered. "Don't say my name like you have the right." His voice was low and rough, each word cutting like a blade. "You got close to me just for your story, didn't you?" Lena froze. Every word pierced her chest. "I trusted you, Lena. I told you about my mother, about my plans for the future. I even brought you home to meet Eliza, and you?" His voice broke into a harsh edge. "You're an investigative journalist digging into my company." Lena drew in a shaky breath, her hands trembling. "Yes, I approached you for that reason. I'm a reporter. I found irregularities in your company, and you think I'm the mastermind, that I'm laundering money, just some greedy, heartless CEO. Cashin's voice boomed sharp with rage. Lena bit her lip, tears burning her eyes, but she held them back. "I don't know. I have evidence, Cashin. Evidence with your signature. I can't pretend it doesn't exist." "But what?" he barked. Her voice cracked, the words cutting her as much as him. "But I can't pretend I don't have feelings for you either. I'm torn between justice and my heart. I don't want to believe you're guilty, but my conscience won't let me close my eyes." Silence slammed into the room. Only Lena's frantic heartbeat filled the void. Cashin stared at her, pain and fury wearing in his eyes. "So all the smiles, the hand-holding, that kiss, it was all part of your plan?" Lena shook her head violently. "No, maybe it started that way. But later I truly felt something. You have to believe me. Believe. Cashin's laugh was sharp, cold enough to make her shiver. You've turned me into a joke. I, who trusted no one, ended up falling for a reporter's trap. Cashin, please just listen. He turned away, his voice ragged. It's over, Lena. I don't want to see you again. The door shut with a chilling click. Lena collapsed into a chair, burying her trembling face in her hands. Everything felt like it had shattered. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to throw it all away. Her job, the story, the evidence, just to keep him. But deep inside, another voice rose. If he's guilty, you can't look away. If he's innocent, justice will clear his name. Lena exhaled, a bitter laugh escaping. Congratulations, heart. You've managed to lose both love and work in a single morning. The rest of the day, she drifted like a ghost through the newsroom. Colleagues whispered, her editor pressed, her laptop screen glared white, the cursor blinking like mockery. She typed a few words, then deleted them. Tears spilled, blurring the screen. That night, she sat by her window, staring at the glowing city. Somewhere out there, Cashin was surely in his glass tower office. But now a wall stood between them, unbreakable. Her voice quivered as she whispered into the night, I don't know what to believe anymore, Cashin. I only know I never meant to hurt you. In the days after Grant Ashford's article, Lena felt as if she'd been cast adrift in a small boat caught in a storm. The Vail Group was reeling, its stock plummeting uncontrollably. The media reveled in the chaos. The public devoured the scandal and Cashin had vanished from her sight. Lena withdrew from the official investigation. But she couldn't sit still. Every night she buried herself in her laptop, opening and reopening files. If she could just find the truth, she could save Cashin and her own heart. One late night, sitting in a near-empty cafe, her inbox lit up. An anonymous email, no subject line, no signature, just a single short line and an attachment. The one orchestrating this is Miles Kincaid. Be careful. Lena's heartbeat spiked. She opened the attachment. Internal logs, scanned agreements, transfer slips, each carrying the signature of Miles Kincaid. The company's vice president, the very man Cashin had trusted implicitly. Lena sagged into her chair, her thoughts in turmoil. So Cashin hadn't signed. He was innocent. But how could she prove it to everyone? The following night, leaving the newsroom after midnight, Lena realized someone was on her tail. Heavy footfalls echoed behind her, a looming shadow stretching longer beneath the street lamps. Two men stepped out, cutting off her way. Their faces were hard, merciless. One sneered, Mr. Kincaid says, it's time you stop digging. You don't want to vanish, do you? Lena clenched her bag, her heart pounding. She forced a wavering smile. Sorry, I'm not the sort who takes kindly to threats. But one man lifted his hand, metal flashing in the dark. Lena stumbled back, her throat dry. At that exact second, an engine roared. A familiar car skidded to the curb, the door flinging open. Cashin emerged tall, broad-shouldered, his black suit stark under the streetlights. His gray eyes burned cold enough to make the men hesitate. He seized her hand, gripping tight, his voice unsteady. Don't say another word. I believe you. Please don't leave me. The ambulance arrived. They lifted her onto a stretcher. Cashin climbing in beside her, never releasing her hand. He bowed his head, whispering like a child's lost prayer. God, please don't take her from me. I'll give up everything. The stock, the company, the name. Just let her live. In the A, Lena lay motionless, machines beeping steadily. Cashin waited outside. Suit stained with blood, hair disheveled, gray eyes fixed on the closed doors, his face carved with fear and pain. The police came with updates. Miles was in custody, but Cashin barely reacted. He just kept repeating the same plea. Save her, please save her. I fear nothing. Except losing Lena. When the storm finally eased that night, Cashin understood for the first time that the woman who had stepped into his world on a single, whispered pretense had become the one truth he could never lose. The hospital room was stark white, so quiet the IV's drip could be heard. Cashin sat at her bedside, his usually steely gray eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. He'd never imagined himself trembling in prayer, but for 24 hours straight, he'd whispered only one plea. "Lena, don't leave me." His hand never let go of hers. Her small fingers were limp, her skin pale. He lifted her fingers to his lips and whispered, "I'm sorry I doubted you. Sorry I left you to face it alone. Just wake up, and I swear I'll never let you go again." A small sound split the stillness. Cashin's head snapped up. Lena's lashes fluttered, then slowly rose. I'm alive. Yes, you're safe." He bowed his forehead to her hand, and for the first time the unshakable man looked breakable like a lost boy. Lena managed a faint smile. "You don't have to worry so much." "Don't say that," he cut in, the depth of his voice unsteady. "I was a fool not to trust you. Seeing you like that, I understood how terrified I am of losing you." Tears slid down her cheeks. "There were times I kept things from you. I used you to get closer to the truth. Then my heart betrayed my logic. I fell in love with you, Cashin." His gaze lifted, blazing with regret and something fiercer. "So did I from the night you almost toppled in those lethal heels. I knew my heart wasn't mine anymore. I was just too proud, too cold, to admit it." Lena let out a fragile laugh. "You cracking jokes about shoes?" "Yes, because you're the one who taught me how." He tightened his hold. "No more pretending, Lena. I want this real. I want the world to know you're mine." In the days that followed, she mended bit by bit. Cashin barely left her side-fielding reports in the corner of her hospital room, mangling apple peel so badly Eliza snorted into her sleeve. "My brother holding a knife like that father would faint," Eliza teased. Lena laughed softly, her chest warm. Cashin shot her a sheepish look and murmured, "I've never peeled an apple for anyone. Consider yourself honored." "I do," Lena said, eyes bright as she squeezed his hand. When she was strong enough to be discharged, Cashin called a press conference. Flashbulbs detonated. Questions flew. At the podium he wasn't the remote ICCEO, his voice rang clear and certain. "I, Cashin Vale, am innocent of these charges. The true perpetrator has been arrested. And I owe everything to one person, the woman who risked it all to expose the truth." He turned, offered Lena his hand, and drew her into the glare. The room exploded with shock. Her heart thundered, but Cashin looked only at her, warmth softening every line of his face. "Just for her," he whispered. "No more pretending." Lena's smile trembled through tears. "No more pretending." That evening, they went back to the riverside where they had once walked. Only this time there was no space between them, no doubts left. Cashin slipped a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to a simple, luminous ring. "I can't promise perfection. I've learned it doesn't exist. But I can promise to stand beside you, always. Will you start this new beginning with me?" Lena laughed weightily, covering her mouth. "You really know how to time these things. I'm still in a hospital coat." "All the better. It proves unserious," Cashin said with a shrug. She nodded softly, tears streaming, a radiant smile breaking through her face. "Yes, I will." He wrapped her tightly in his arms, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "This time, no pretending. This time it's forever." Autumn had arrived, dressing the city in a soft golden hue beneath a sky of startling blue. That day, the Vale estate did not host one of its usual brand galas. There were no thousands of guests in tuxedos or glittering gowns. Instead, the garden bloomed with roses, rows of white chairs lined neatly, satin ribbons tied with care, and the familiar faces of only a few. Eliza, close friends, and loyal staff who had stood by Cashin for years. Lena stood behind the glass doors leading out to the garden. Her wedding dress was pure white, simple, not extravagant, hugging her figure just enough to make her glow beneath the gentle sunlight. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling around the bouquet she held. Eliza giggled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Relax, my brother's out there looking at you like he's about to cry. I think he's more nervous than you are." Lena laughed, the sound easing her nerves. "Cashin, nervous? Believe me, ever since you walked into his life, he hasn't been the cold machine he used to be." Eliza wonked. The music began. The doors opened. Lena walked slowly down the flower-strewn aisle. Every gaze turned to her, but she saw only one Cashin. He stood waiting, dressed in a simple black suit, flawless in its cut. His usually icy gray eyes shone brightly, brimming with emotion. When Lena drew closer, his lips curved into a rare, warm smile. The ceremony began. The minister's voice rang out, calm and deep. "We gather here to witness a new beginning. Not a performance, not a pretense, but true love." Lena squeezed Cashin's hand, her eyes glistening with tears. He looked at her, his voice steady. "I once thought I had to be perfect, to be cold, to protect everything. But when I met you, I realized all I needed was to be myself. I promise I'll never let you fight alone again. I promise I'll believe in you, even if the whole world turns away." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. Her voice wavered, yet carried strength. "I came to you pretending at first, but my heart betrayed me. I fell in love with you. I promise to stand by your side in light or in darkness. And I promise never to let treacherous heels trip me again, so you won't have to worry." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the solemn air, and even Cashin chuckled. He tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes shining. Then the minister smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Cashin leaned in, brushing his lips over hers as applause rang out. Cheers rose, and Eliza's laughter carried above them all. After the ceremony, there was no lavish reception. Instead, Cashin and Lena sat by the garden's pond, surrounded only by warm yellow lights and those dearest to them. With a glass of wine in hand, Lena tilted her head toward him. "Funny, isn't it? We started with a whispered pretense, and now here we are, truly husband and wife." Cashin gently brushed her hair back, his voice low and steady. "No more pretending. This is forever," Lena smiled, her heart overflowing. She nestled her head against his shoulder and watched fireworks unfurl across the night. Their colors mirrored in their eyes, a quiet proof the storm had cleared and a new road awaited them.